Thank you everyone for joining us this evening for a talk by Kamalika Bose on the Hoysala legacy, Belur, Halebidu and Somanathapura. So Kamalika, I welcome you on behalf of the Chairman of the CSMVS and the Board of Trustees, the Director General, Mr. Sabyasachi Mukherjee, and the staff of the CSMVS, on behalf of my Executive Committee of the Museum Society and our members and our guests who are joining us here this evening. It's really, we've come full circle with Kamalika, ladies and gentlemen. Hers was the full offline talk, the last offline talk that we had in March. I've got her card here for those of you who remember, and that was on the 12th of March, 2020. And then we went into lockdown immediately and have done most of our lectures on Zoom. So thank you to our loyal followers and members for being with us all these years. We've had over 120 lectures in this last 3.5 years. I think it's creditable for the society because we all work here on a volunteer basis. So thank you, Kamalika. It's a double honor because of the UNESCO recognition that this site has received very, very recently. A few words about Kamalika for those of you who don't know her. She completed her master's in historic preservation planning from the prestigious Cornell University as a Fulbright scholar and was assistant professor at the SET University, Ahmedabad from 2008 to 2015. She is the recipient of the Society of Architectural Historians and Getty International Fellowship, the European Union's Global Cultural Leadership Program, and the French Ministry of Culture's International Training Program. Kamalika is an expert member of ICOMOS, on the International Scientific Committee of ICOMOS on Shared Built Heritage, and the steering committee member of the Scientific Council, also for ICOMOS, representing India. Living in Mumbai for the last 8 years, she has also worked with UDRI and the G5A Foundation for Contemporary Culture and has taught at Krivya and Grand Prabha. But more importantly, after her academic accolades, she founded the Heritage Synergies of India, a Mumbai-based consultancy bridging practice, research, and education. Her work lies at the intersection of built and cultural heritage, museum design and curation, writing, and teaching. Kamalika has worked on community-oriented urban conservation and adaptive reuse initiatives in historic cities, such as Kolkata's Chitpur Road and Chinatown, Mumbai's Worli Kolivada and our dockyard, Azimganj in Murshidabad, and Old Dhaka town. She's also curatorial and design consultant for museum and cultural heritage projects, working on upcoming new museums and exhibitions in India. She has authored 5 books, including People Called Kolkata, published by Random House in 2019, and The Hoysala Legacy, published by JECO in 2019. A few words of what we're going to hear this evening. The Hoysalas were supreme rulers of the southern Deccan in the 12th and 13th centuries. Together with their queens, ministers, and commanders, they sponsored a series of truly magnificent temples, the most famous of which are those at Belur, Halebidu and Somanathapura. The complicated layouts, elaborate wall treatments, and spacious interiors of these monuments testify to the genius of the Hoysala designers and builders while they carved friezes, wall panels, column brackets, illustrating Hindu myths and legends, showcase the talents and the imagination of the Hoysala artists, many of whom signed their work. It's a beautiful site. I visited it many years ago. There were not too many people there, but they are really beautiful monuments of architecture, very, very praiseworthy, south of the Vindhyas. I urge you all to join us when we make a trip there and look forward to seeing many, many of you. Especially now, that this site has been declared as India's 42nd UNESCO World Heritage Site, where there's a new spotlight on these three temples as the sacred assemblies of the Hoysalas, and this talk will conclude by highlighting these values. So thank you so much, Kamalika. I really, really appreciate. I know you're traveling constantly, visiting so many projects of yours. Thank you for taking the time out and joining us this evening. We're looking forward to a spectacular array of slides. And before I hand the technical team over to all of you and to Kamalika, I want to thank our technical team for supporting us so well under the able guidance of Jason Johns and leading us smoothly evening after evening for these talks. So thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us, and really enjoy this evening's talk. It's something quite special for India. Over to you, Kamalika.
Thank you so much, Firoza ma'am, for that very warm and generous welcome. I'm really happy to be back speaking now in this virtual mode to the audience at the Museum Society of Mumbai. So thank you so much to the Museum Society and the CSM VS for once again having me deliver a talk. This subject is really special to me because as Firoza ma'am mentioned, 3.5 years back we did the book launch of this is the book, a small handy guidebook called the Hoysala Legacy, published by JECO for the Deccan Heritage Foundation. So this is the book that we launched at the visitor center of the CSMVS Museum under the Museum Society, and I delivered a book talk. This is a book that I co-authored with Dr. George Michel, who's also delivered multiple lectures on other titles that he has written, the authority that he is on South Asian architecture and temple architecture, especially of the Deccan. So it was really a massive pleasure for me to be delivering a book talk. And now 3.5 years later, these sites have been inscribed to the UNESCO as India's 42nd World Heritage Site. And I think there's a renewed interest and a renewed spotlight on these sites again. And I'm going to highlight some of these aspects and present to all of you today. So I hope you enjoy it. I'll start sharing my presentation. So I'm going to start with a little bit of context on this book itself for those of you who may not have attended the talk at the museum in person a few years ago. So this was the book that I was just showing you that I had the great privilege and honor of co-authoring with Dr. George Michel for the Deccan Heritage Foundation. The intention of this book was really, and a lot of my talk here today draws from the material and the research that we did in this period in 2019, over the entire year of 2019, and the end of the year is when the book was launched. So the intention of this book was really, if we look at the Hoysala temples as a whole, they are quite well researched. There's been a lot of scholarly body of work which has looked into the Hoysala temples across different generations, different time periods in India and abroad. But what we felt that most of these books, and of course what I'm showing you on the screen is not an absolutely comprehensive view of it's a very extensive bibliography that can be created of books and scholarly works created on Hoysala art, architecture, and iconography. So this is just a very small sampling of it. But as you can see from some of the titles, most of them focus on very specific aspects of these temples, be it the narratives, be narrative panels, be it the art, be it the inscriptions, be it the sculptures. So each of these one can go into a great amount of depth. But what we thought was really needed through this book was a handy guidebook which is for everybody, which is accessible research, which is enjoyable and affordable, and these can be made available as guidebooks at the various small stalls and guide shops which are there. So it will It will act as an aid for visitors to the site to understand these places in a more holistic and informed manner. So that was the intent of this book, not purely academic, therefore. So we've also tried to keep the language and the whole presentation very accessible, but being informed and for an educated audience who wants to know more about these sites in an authentic way. So this is just a little bit of background of George and me through 2019 when we had visited some of these sites, our field work as to what is it that we can say beyond what has already been said, what is already known to people about the Hoysala sites. So we wanted to focus on not only the three monuments. So the focus of my talk today is going to be the three monuments specifically which have been inscribed. But as part of the guidebook, we have included other sites such as this water tank or the Kalyani Hulikari, other sites in Hoysala, in the countryside of Halebidu and Belur, so that one can plan a 2 or 3 day itinerary around these sites. And in the process, there was a lot of sort of relearning for me as well. And I kind of almost became a student once again, dipping into the vast body of knowledge and wisdom that George has, of course, you know, accompanying him and co-authoring this book with him, but also seeing these places in new light. And that really helped us to sort of relook at a lot of the elements, a lot of the design elements, a lot of the sculptures, looking at the logic, the math, the proportion, the rhythm in which these places were kind of holistically envisioned. And the book is really a culmination, therefore, of we trying to put together not only the focusing on the art and iconography, but also the logic of the architecture, the logic of the plan, the intention of the patrons and the builders. And because these sites today, as we saw, are really these living monuments, and they act as educational tools for students from the local and the regional countryside, schools, colleges, etc. So they really become textbooks and laboratories for everyone, including the young children, to learn from. And we hope that this book will contribute, therefore, in that way also to this body of building this body of new knowledge in today's time. And it just so happened that this was also the time at the end of 2019 that we realized that in Bangalore, they were beginning to prepare a dossier to inscribe these sites for the World Heritage. And Belur and Halebidu, of course, had already been enlisted since 2014. But Somanathapura was something that they were, Intag Bangalore, who was given the responsibility to prepare the dossier, was also then considering. And I think this book helped in a great degree to reinforce the importance and the significance of Somanathapura as a site to sort of complement and complete this trio of sites, which were finally then inscribed almost exactly a month ago on the 18th of September as the Sacred Ensembles of the Hoysalas. So in that sense, I feel that there is this sort of renewed interest and spotlight on these sites. So now moving directly into what this context is all about, and who were really the Hoysalas and what were the territories that they commanded. So you can see in this visual here that the history of the Hoysalas really spans from their rise in the 11th century up until their demise in the mid 14th century. It was a fertile domain through which flowed three rivers, the Yagachi, the Hemavati, and the Kaveri. With dependable monsoons, these rivers made cattle grazing and cultivation of cereals possible, which the kingdom's agrarian economy relied on. So you can see this is the Somanathapura Keshava temple and the kind of landscape, the verdant, fertile landscape. And on the top left, you can see the river that passes through the rear of the site, and a very traditional agraharam and a village settlement that continues to reside in its proximity even today. Originating in southwest Karnataka in the forested hills of the Western Ghats, they subsequently shifted to the Deccan trade route city of Belur and then founded Halebidu to govern over much of the southern Deccan for over 200 years. Profitable trade routes included the Tungabhadra Valley, the Yadav territories in Maharashtra, and along the Kaveri into the prosperous Cholas and Pandya territories in Tamil Nadu, stretching their kingdom for over 500 kilometers, encompassing most of Karnataka. So this is an important, interesting sort of site to kind of look at these sites today. If we kind of look through simple maps such as Google, etc., we really see the density at which they built. Because if we historically see what was that nature of patronage, and that is really important for us to understand that though we are focusing on 3 of the iconic temples today, over their entire reign, they built more than 300 religious monuments, of which almost 50% of the sites exist even today in various degrees. And if you see essentially today, in this triangle that is kind of formed between Bangalore to the east, Mysore to the south, and Chikmagalur to the west, you have the bulk of the Hoysala temple sites present and prevalent even today. So within a very accessible and small radius, there was a lot of patronage and a profusion of building activity that was taking place or in less than 150 years. So what made it possible, and what did these rulers do as strategies in order to have this level of profuse temple building activity? So for this, we kind of look a little bit into this, the development of the genealogy of the generations of the Hoysala dynasty itself, to understand that before emerging as an independent lineage, the Hoysalas were subordinates and feudatories of the Chalukya rulers in the northern Karnataka area. So Vishnuvardhan, who you see is the name highlighted in pink as in the 4th row, was the first Hoysala to assert his autonomy. And in 1117, he captured Talakad in the extreme south of Karnataka, 165 kilometers from Halebidu. And that is when an independent flourish and supremacy of a line of independent Hoysala kings really began. And it was around this time, under his patronage, that we see the 2 iconic dynastic monuments of the Chennakeshava temple in Belur and the Hoysaleshwar temple in Halebidu, which were developed. Then again, through the subsequent generations, we see the 2 important kings who are Narasimha I and Ballal II. But between them, that was probably the most stable period of the dynasty. And between them, they governed for almost 80 years. And it was then that many new towns, settlements were established, as well as infrastructure of the area, irrigation tanks, canals, and wells, resulted in a period of unprecedented prosperity and territorial expansion. And so when, by the time Someshwara inherited the kingdom in 1235, it was really an affluent and prestigious kingdom to inherit. But then we see 150 years later, in 1268, under Narasimha III's patronage, we see the Keshava temple being built. And I'll just like to park this in your mind, and we'll come back to this later as to how this evolution and this development really happened, separated by 150 years. So here I'll take another slide just to talk about a little bit about Vishnuvardhan himself, who was the first independent Hoysala and probably the most important figure of this period, who was responsible for the great religious monuments both at Belur and Halebidu. As acts of commemoration, he erected the Vishnu of glory, or Kirti Narayan, at Talakad, and also the Vishnu of victory, or Vijay Narayan, at Belur. After relocating to Halebidu 5 years later, Vishnuvardhan commissioned a grand temple with twin linga sanctuaries, the Hoysaleshwar, dedicated to himself, and the Shantaleshwar, to his principal queen, Shaltala Devi. But this is not all. Vishnuvardhan also consolidated his power by distributing coveted positions to his ministers, generals, and governors, as well as to Ganga, Chola, and Pandya families who he had defeated but who had accepted his leadership. He also proceeded into Chalukya domains to recruit skilled builders and artists, to begin a long tradition of patronage towards developing a very unique style of Hoysala architecture and sculpture. And apart from direct royal benefactions, we also see Hoysala kings and queens provide funds to their ministers, generals, and governors, and sometimes even to the elite bodyguards. And the whole idea was to consolidate the local loyalties. This pattern of sponsorship is what really allowed them to get a widespread network of resources and political allegiances. And therefore, this led to this profuse temple building activity. And therefore, it is understood that the Keshava temple, while it is built in the period of Narasimha's reign, was actually financed and funded by Somanatha Dandanayaka, who was an important minister and commander. And he used funds from the royal treasury to commission the Keshav temple and name it after the patron, that is himself. And similarly, while the dynastic monument of the Hoysaleshwar is also named after Vishnuvardhan and his queen, it is believed that it was entirely funded in honor of the king by Ketamalla, an influential merchant officer. And all of this information is actually very accessible and and therefore we have a great amount of detail, because the Hoysala rulers and their subsidiaries were very conscious about recording all of these information in great amount of detail in these kind of inscriptions, which recorded, eulogized, disseminated, and later today allow for great amount of interpretation. And I'm just going to read a small excerpt of 91 lines of Old Kannada on the Keshava temple inscription, and what are the things that it talks about. So it gives us a very good idea of who the patron of the temple was, what was the date of its construction, the provisions made for the worship of its three deities. So in the Keshava temple in Somanathapura, there are three chambers in the Garbhagriha, and the livelihoods of its employees. The text also continues with an account of the rise of the Hoysalas and their genealogy down to Narasimha III. It then relates that when the king was seated in the council chamber in his capital in Halebidu, the commander Somanath Dandanayak requested funds to erect a Vaishnav monument and Agraharam at his estate and name it Somanathapura. There is another inscription which talks about additional bequests made at subsequent periods by Narasimha III to merchants and teachers, as well as other grants made to priests and officers by the next ruler, Ballal III. All of these grants include details of the temple rituals and ceremonies, shedding light onto religious practice, and also how the funds were utilized in the temple, within the temple. The part circular panel above the inscription, so every inscription has this sort of a semicircular panel on top, which depicts the deities, the three principal deities, Keshav, Janardhan, and Venugopal, who are different aspects of Vishnu installed in the three different sanctuaries. Similarly, we see that this plurality of patronage, which was also prevalent, and the Hoysala kings were patronizing all three predominant faiths of their time, contributing to Shaiva, Vaishnav, and Jain monuments. And inscriptions in each of these temples tell us, just through their iconography, what kind of a temple it was. So if you can see in the top left is from one of the Shaiva temples. So you can see it in the iconography of the linga present on the head of the inscription. The one below is what we just saw from the Keshava temple. And the one on the right is from the Shantinath Basidi, a Jain monument. So you see a seated Jain Tirthankar within the language of the inscription. And this is another important monument, and though we're not going into its details, but to talk about this range of patronage that the Hoysala rulers were engaging in. And this is the very expansive Parshvanath and Shantinath Basadi, again built by Bopanna, a commander and an influential Jain patron. And this was made in honor of Vishnuvardhan's Jain queen, Shantala Devi. Another important way in which the royal, the aspect of royalty was conveyed and visualized and embedded within the formal aspects of the temple was this motif of the sala. It is a story, a legend, a fable, which kind of gave the Hoysalas their name and the basis of their existence. So Vishnuvardhan is also credited with inventing the fable about the sala, a mythical founder of the Hoysala lineage. The hero that you see on the left is shielded, had apparently shielded a meditating Jain sage called Sudatta from a yali, or savage leonine beast, the sage crying Hoysala, which means strike, Sala. This legendary act of rescue was related by the Hoysalas in their poems and engraved records, and depicted as a royal motif in temple sculptures, especially at entrances and rooftops. So this is one place where you find the Sala sculpture, mostly at the entrances, but you also find it just in front of the Shikhar, as you see in this temple, the Veerbhadra temple in Halebidu, where it is on the roof as well, and it acts as a marker in the landscape. Another tool the rulers had was to represent themselves, and this is an interesting panel in the front entrance of the Belur temple, which depicts a royal audience. It is likely that the central figure in the central panel is a portrait of Ballal II, who was responsible for adding these screens to the temple at Belur. So the Hoysala monarch is shown seated here in the company of his principal queen and her retinue, along with officers and advisors and disciples. And in the register above, you see sculptures of Narasimha and Keshav between Hanuman and Garud, almost bestowing their divine blessings on the ruler. So this was another way in which the rulers sort of enshrine their legacy and stamp onto some of these temples as well. And then, of course, we also have in the patronage some females queens, some principal queens such as Shantala Devi, and there's an entire Amar Chitra Katha book which is dedicated to Shantala Devi, the noted Jain queen of Vishnuvardhan. And these are two monuments which she commissioned, the Shantinath Basadi in Halebidu, what you see below, which we spoke about, and the Kappe Chennagriya temple just beside the Chennakeshava in Belur. So the queens were also commissioning temples at that time, and this is another salient, unique feature. Now, coming to the two specific temples which were built by Vishnuvardhan as dynastic monuments. So some of us, initially, it's a little baffling as to why and how two major temples would be built very close to each other, just about 14 kilometers away, and just about 5 years apart. And while the Belur Chennakeshava is a Vishnu temple, it's a Vaishnav monument, the dynastic monument in Halebidu, in the capital of the Hoysala, is a Shaiva monument. And then we also see how between these two temples, they really tried significantly, they tried to use these two temples as a canvas to experiment, innovate, and perfect the Hoysala idiom of architecture. And there are many aspects which they tried to introduce in the monument in Belur, and then either they innovated on it or removed it and added a new element, as we see if we study these two monuments closely. And I'm going to come to some of that as we move along. But it's important for us to understand that in a span of 5 to 10 years, so very close, these two very grand monuments were built by Vishnuvardhan's time to kind of set the foundation of the dynasty. So when we look at the Belur complex, the Chennakeshwara, which is the central temple with the large footprint, which is number 4, stands in a high-walled paved courtyard measuring 135 by 120 meters. So it sits within a very defined boundary, which is entered from the east through a lofty gopura. All other buildings in the courtyard, including the gopura, belong to later periods, even though they incorporate reused Hoysala stone pieces. In contrast, so this is the Belur temple, an aerial view of it. So the central large temple that you see is the Chennakeshwara, but around it you have a set of other temples which were added over a period of time to form a very defined enclosed perimeter to this temple. On the other hand, when we look at the plan of Halebidu, prior to Vishnuvardhan, it was founded by Vinayaditya as the headquarters, Dwara Samudra, which is present-day Halebidu. He constructed a vast reservoir or samudra, which you see as the tank in the plan, which gave the name of the city. Apart from the Hoysaleshwar temple, which is site number 1 on this map, very little survives at Halebidu and suggests that in the 12th and 13th century, this was Dwara Samudra. So this was really the capital city. So you see there are archaeological relics and other secondary and tertiary monuments, such as other temple complexes, a palace area near the Benigudda hill, of which just some foundation stones remain today, and the fortified walls, again, of which only few fragments remain today. So this was, as the capital city, imagined as a fortified town with the Hoysaleshwar temple as its central jewel. And this is what remains of it today, and we will get into this in detail as we move along. But when we come to the Somanathapura temple, this temple, built 150 years later, is really like a grand summation. Of course, in this interim, many temples were built, as we saw in the map earlier. But this temple, again, not all of those other temples encapsulated every aspect that was experimented or achieved as the height of Hoysala art and architecture. But in this temple, this small jewel, much smaller in size than the other two dynastic monuments, we find an outstanding example of late Hoysala architecture and art. This is about 35 kilometers west of Mysore, and it is associated with the Brahmin Agraharam and is part of a wider sacred geography that extended up to the Kaveri. So these 3 temples, therefore, is what we're going to talk about in more detail today. But to understand these three temples better, we also need to look at the artistic and creative agency that the sculptors and the guilds of the time, so individuals as well as guilds, who displayed a great amount of mastery over their medium. And this is really what lends Hoysala art and architecture its very, very unique characteristic. And we have to understand the artistic agency that was enjoyed by these people. So this is an interesting way to understand that in addition to evidence substantiating the role of Hoysala patrons, plentiful information is also available about individual sculptures, masons, and scribes. This is in striking contrast with temples elsewhere in India, where most craftsmen are unacknowledged, unsung heroes. Label inscriptions on carvings give the names, titles, and affiliations of the workmen offering invaluable insight into the socio-economic condition of artists in Hoysala times. So there was also this is one of the important bracket figures in Belur, and 42 such bracket figures exist in the Belur temple, which bear the names of different carvers, as you can see here at the base of the bracket, indicating the considerable number of specialists on this ambitious project. Some compare themselves to Vishwakarma, the legendary architect of the universe. Others describe themselves as destroyers or thunderbolts or rival sculptors or calligraphers, suggesting a keen competition between them. There is also an amount of pride that they take in their work, a degree of ownership and therefore by engraving their name, they leave their own lasting legacy on the monument. Labels often specify the names of the guilds to which the artists belong, one of which called its members servants of Saraswati. So this we see not only in the bracket figures, but here across various horizontal panels at the base of the central deities, and all of these boxes that I've highlighted in pink indicate to you these signatures left behind by the artists. One of the most famous Hoysala artists is Dasoja from Baligram, who is first noticed in Belur, where he carved several bracket figures. Dasoja's name is also found in Halebidu and other sites, indicating that he traveled widely in response to different assignments. Mallitamma, another celebrated sculptor, was active for almost 60 years, traveling between projects all over the kingdom. He ended his career at Somanathapura, where his name is found incised on the elephants of the temple plinth, as well as on wall panels and even one of the towers. So you can see that the long career of the artisans also had to do something with continuity and passing on the tradition, which is also why 150 years later, we are able to see the same amount of finesse and craftsmanship, because this tradition and this pride in the work that they did continue through. Another factor that really aided this profuse production and artistic ability was this essential ingredient in Hoysala architecture, which is the raw material itself, which is the construction material that was locally available within this a large area of southern Karnataka, called the gray-green chloritic schist, locally referred to as soapstone. This was a blackish, bluish stone, which was comparatively soft, but over time, once it is carved, it hardens and becomes really robust and durable. And one can use it for very fine filigree level of artistry, as you see in the sculptures, but even for structural work to span beams and columns which are as tall as 3.5 meters and span beams which are almost 4 meters. So it served a sort of a monolithic material which was used right from structural to artistic level of details. And this has really allowed a very unified visual language, both in terms of the coloration of these temples, the lace-like filigree work on the bodies of its deities and divinities, as well as the overall structural shell of these temples. The interiors of the mandapa columns of all of these three temples is therefore another unique aspect and become showpieces of masonry technique. Columns use circular shafts exhibiting curved profiles that enlivened by precisely cut sharp incisions and ridges, whose method of fashioning out of the schist, though is much debated, but it is assumed that these large blocks of stone were placed vertically on a rotating base and then trimmed with metal wires, after which they were treated with an abrasive material to attain this mirror-like polish. Other columns have square shafts with multiple facets, polygonal shafts with cutout bands or foliation, or stellate shafts with sharp angled points. And this we can see consistently as an evolution of style across these temples. So the material that they chose also gave them a significant advantage than their predecessors to build with this degree of detail. We now come to the temple architecture itself, and between these three temples, how they tried to perfect the form, and what were the key unique features of this hybrid and assimilative vocabulary. And why do I call it hybrid and assimilative? I will come to just in a short while. The expansion of the Hoysalas into northern Karnataka and their campaign beyond Maharashtra into Malwa and southward in Tamil country had its consequences in the builders, masons, and craftsmen that they brought on board from these regions, and they moved from the zone to zone within the kingdom, which allowed for a lot of these cross-pollination of ideas to take place, but develop a vocabulary which then became uniquely Hoysala. So one place that we see this is in the types of shikharas or pinnacles that within the three temples. This migration between the craftsmen moving from one zone of the kingdom to the other explains the diversity of features in Hoysala architecture. The Dravid style imported from the Tamil zone, a Karnataka version of the Dravid style inherited from the Chalukyas and perfected by the Hoysalas known as the Vesara, and the Bhumija variant of the North Indian Nagar style learned from the Yadavs and the Paramaras. So we see them imbibing these traditions both from the North and the South Indian traditions, and owning them and innovating on them to create these hybrid versions that we then see in both the main pinnacles as well as the sub-shrines in front of the entrance to various monuments. We also see the variations in the design of the pillars, and this is something that they inherited from the Chalukyas. The image that you see on the left are various pillars of the mandapa of a Chalukyan temple, which they then sort of made their own in the schist material with more amount of detailing, ridges, and craftsmanship. And it is believed that the circularity was achieved through circular lathe-turned shafts, which allowed them to work deep incisions and rims and get this very jeweled sort of a finish to it. But what is interesting is the kind of variations that was achieved in the form of the temple plan itself. Hoysala temples present a considerable variety of layouts incorporating single, double, or triple sanctuaries at Belur, Halebidu, and Somanathapura, respectively. Each of the twin linga sanctuaries in Halebidu faces into a mandapa and beyond towards a freestanding Nandi pavilion, which, while those at Somanathapura accommodate different forms of Vishnu and open into a central common mandapa. A tower soaring above the sanctuary, its summit coincides with the linga or the image in each of these garbhagrihas to proclaim the presence of the deity. So this is really interesting because with every temple, they added a level of complexity. And these three temples as a trio best represent this variation of the complexity in the plan form that was added over this 150-year period. And while we do see certain elements that they have been inspired by Chalukyan temples, the relationship between the Garbhagriha and the Mandapa, the relation that we see in temples in Pattadakal, we also see the iconic 1,000-pillar temple by the Kakatiyas, which had a similar Trikuta shrine, but it was separated from the Mandapa. And what the Hoysalas did is they kind of fused the shrine and the Mandapa together, as we see in Somanathapura and Belur. So they were also constantly looking at the various influences around them and improvising on their style. And probably the biggest improvisation was that of the stellate plan. And while we begin to see the stellate plan in some late Chalukyan temples, the zenith and the mastery and the complexity of the stellate plan was probably achieved by the Hoysalas, which is a distinctive aspect of Hoysala temples, an attribute derived from Chalukyan architecture. Sanctuaries at Belur, Halebidu, and Somanathapura all have their walls divided into multiple facets with angled points. Such complex geometries are generated from squares rotated around a common point to create 16-sided configurations. And what this did, this sort of complexity, was it offered maximum surface area for sculptural expression, that and also for precision, because every panel had to precisely fit beside the other one in this complex 16-sided geometry. And that is really this star-shaped plan achieved through this rotation was really what was the glory of these temples in a way. The interior spaces, by and large, comparatively, were much more sparse. And while it had all the aspects, elements, hierarchies of a traditional Hindu temple for active worship, only Belur today retains its active worship, while the other two do not. Adjoining the sanctuary is always a small chamber or vestibule where priests recite suitable prayers, conduct sacraments, and convey offerings. Worshippers gather in the columned hall or mandap, while the sanctuaries to Shiva accommodate the phallic emblem. Those consecrated to Vishnu enshrine a representation of the god in one of his many avatars. So if we kind of break up a Hoysala temple, there are broadly these four phases, these four parts that we can break it up into. The plinth, which is mostly a high sizable plinth or a jagati that it sits on. The adhishtan, or the base, which is further divided into 6 or 8 tiers, and we will come to the iconography of these tiers. The segment of the wall panels, which near the shrine has sculpted panels, and near the mandapa they act as perforated screens that bring in filtered and diffused light into the mandap space. And on top you have the pinnacles or the vimanas. So this is broadly how you can identify the tiers of a temple. And then there are variations within, where what you see here is a Vesara tower, which is boldly modeled with diminishing tiers of miniature shrines with curved or vaulted roofs, reduced to block-like elements on low pilastered walls. Superstructures have inward-facing projections with vault roof-like structures, such as in Somanathapura. In the Lakshmi Devi temple in Dodagaddavalli, we see both the Vesara, which is the one you see on the right, but you also have the Famsana on the left, which is a sort of frontal projection of multiple levels diminishing in size along with the yali in front. The Belur Chennakeshava, interestingly, lacks the tower rising above the sanctuary. There is the inset image shows an old photograph of when the sanctuary made of, the pinnacle made of brick and timber would exist, but it is believed that it was demolished in the 1880s by the Mysore Archaeological Survey because it did not weather and it was not durable enough. So we do know that the Belur temple did have a pinnacle to it, but we don't see it anymore. And same with the Hoysaleshwar in Halebidu, where we understand that there would have been pinnacles in plastered brick and timber, but they would have probably decayed or not been as durable as the stone part of the temple, and they were subsequently removed. The base panels of these temples are other interesting elements, where a 2-meter high basement is composed of 8 friezes separated by deep incisions. The bottom 5 portray lines of high relief elephants, many with riders, proceeding towards the corners. Similarly treated yalis with savage heads and curling tails, occasionally fighting, scrolling, leafy creeper in flat relief, incorporating tiny figures, parades of horses, often with riders. The 6th course, which is, if you stand in front of these temples, the 6th course is largely where your eye level is. So the 6th course is then comprises of narrative panels from the Bhagavad Puran, Mahabharata, or the Ramayana. The topmost 2 courses show makaras with fantastic tails and diminutive riders, separated by looped garlands hanging from kirtimukhas, hamsas with elaborate tails. So there was again a logic and an in the way the basement panels were crafted, and not all would have been carved by the same people, because we have found traces where certain blocks are missing. So these were carved and then sort of mounted onto the body of the temple. And this is another detail where you can see the narrative panels, which are essentially from our ancient texts and stories, while the other ones show more processional or figurative in nature. The grand open porches or mandapas are other important elements, and these are almost on all sides. So you get to access the temple from multiple directions and multi access. Open porches of temple mandapas have stone seats with backrests. So when they were originally carved, it is assumed that it was an open mandap, which is why you see the kind of angular backrests where the pillars are. So you could kind of sit against the edge of the mandap. Over time, these the screens were installed, and as we saw in one of the inscriptions, that Ballal II was known to have installed these in the Belur temple, these screens, and you can see him on the left, the middle register of the left screen, a detail that we saw earlier, a way of leaving his legacy on the temple as well. So these would have all been open porches at one point in time, and then closed with these kind of detailed screens. Ceilings become another playground for a lot of intricate artistic endeavor. Horizontal ceilings inside mandapas are divided into compartments or rise in corbelled rings to create dome-like interiors, often with pendant central lotuses surrounded by cut-out timber-like ribs and rafters, and even interweaving looped bands. The ceiling at Somanathapura is considered to be unsurpassed for their variety and virtuoso technique. Ceilings have ribs with octagonal, multi-lobed, or 12-spoked frames, all with central pendant lotuses. While two of these three monuments are Vaishnav monuments, in the Hoysaleshwar temple, we see two Nandi pavilions fronting the twin shrines of Hoysaleshwar and Shantaleshwar. Its vestibule is occupied by an impressive icon of Surya, which is a Surya temple behind this Nandi pavilion. And the 7 horses of the sun god's chariot are also carved behind where the Nandi is currently sitting. And these were also, if we find parallels of such Nandi pavilions in late Western Chalukya temples as well. But when we look at the Nandi pavilions of the Hoysala temples, we see that both the columns as well as the Nandi, the form of the Nandi itself is a lot more robust and muscular in its expression. So now we come to the final two parts of this presentation, where I'm going to highlight a little bit of this evolution of this artistic grammar. What were the overlaps and what were the points of departure? What were the sort of commonalities that these temples had, and where did they sort of deviate and experiment and innovate further? So if you see on this slide itself, there are two lintel panels. So right when you enter these temples, just above the entrance door, you have these two highly profusely carved panels. The upper one is from the Vishnu temple, and the lower one is from the Hoysaleshwar Shaiva temple. While the structure and the basic logic of the panel remains the same, the central deities in both change. So above you have Vishnu and Lakshmi, his consort by his side, while in the lower one you have a dancing Shiva in the center. And while you also have the makaras and with their billowing tails, and all of that iconography kind of remains the same. But what you see, Shiva and Parvati seated above both the makaras in the lower panel, and you see Vishnu and Lakshmi seated above the makaras in the upper panel. So these were ways in which that it was sort of built into the language of the temple as to who the temple was consecrated to. But when we look at the wall panels, very interesting shifts begin to happen. When we look at the wall panels of the Belur temple, we see that these are kind of static figures, which are mostly in a upright standing posture. So this is on your left, you have Brahma, and on the right, you have Bhikshatana. And while they are placed on pilasters or pillars on the exterior of the temple form, the pillars are still kind of perceivable. The pillars, you can read them as individual structure on top of which a carved panel has been mounted. But we begin to see a shift when we move from Belur to Halebid. And I've kept the left image of Brahma the same, but you can see on the right, when we look at most of the panels of Halebid, we see figures in motion. You hardly come across any deity or divinity who is static in the Halebidu temple. Here you have a dancing Shiva. He's really in motion. Even the minor deities next to him are in motion. They're all playing a flute or in the middle of warfare. So there are different themes that these panels have, but you don't see the static form anymore. You see form in motion in the panels. And even where you have similar themes. So this is on the left, you have from the Belur temple, the same theme of a wall panel showing Shiva dancing inside the skin of the elephant demon. But when you see the same theme depicted in Halebid, you see that the two Shivas, their body language, their motion, their form, it's a lot more animated in the Halebidu temple than in the Belur temple. And here Shiva also now has other figures on both his sides, which are also in an animated posture. They may be dancing, or they may be standing in a stylized pose. So there was a great degree of innovation and shift where you were trying to create this sculpture in motion. And then we see other additions which were initially influenced maybe by Chalukyan art, but the Hoysalas kind of mastered it and perfected it through these high relief sculptures. So here you have a Ganesha, but you kind of have these other additional elements of the foliated canopy above him, a highly carved base upon which he stands. So you can see the sort of echoes of Hoysala sculpture originating from some Western Chalukya period sculptures, but there was a complete, like a hyperreal 3D way in which these sculptures were imagined on the Hoysala temples. And when you see a wide sort of surface of the Hoysala temples, especially in Halebidu, you see the wall sculptures are all animated. They almost look they're going to sort of jump out of the wall and break into a sort of tandav or a dance. And you don't, and while in the Belur temple, you had the individual pillar, which you could still read, such as the Brahma that we saw. Here, you cannot tell what is a wall, what is a pillar, what is a pilaster. It's all kind of imagined as one continuous surface, a continuous canvas where one kind of flows into the other. One canopy kind of flows into the next one. There is a three-dimensionality where the rock, the stone, and its rectangular sort of form has almost melted away and become this animated scenography that you're seeing. And when by the time we move to Somanathapura, what we see is that the figures have become kind of static again. But what they have done here is that they have kind of walked out 150 years later, this sort of a module, almost like a module where many teams, different teams and different artisans were working, but they were working on a module of a certain panel size, and on how each panel and sub panel would kind of fit beside each other. And you kind of see over here that the canopy, the base, and the proportions of these divinities, whether they are standing or whether they are seated, there is a kind of standardization which has been achieved. It's not as dynamic, as playful as we see in Halebidu, but there are other elements such as the sub-shrines on top. The corners have been resolved in a way that all the negative spaces also has minor sculptures in it. And as you zoom into each of these sculptures, you see that there is a variation in the design of the foliage of the canopy, or whether the figure is seated or whether the figure is standing. But they have managed to achieve a sort of precision within what they're doing. It's not as experimental and playful as the first two dynastic monuments were. So across these three temples, therefore, you're able to study this wide repertoire of the ups and downs and the innovations and experimentations that the entire tradition, artistic tradition, and the arc that it has been able to achieve. So now I'll just focus on few of the key iconographic themes that we see here. And in Halebidu, as I said, that we see the maximum of this movement, where one panel almost continues into the next panel, and gods and deities seem like they're flying. And this is panel showing Vishnu and Lakshmi on Garuda. So Garuda's kind of carrying them on their shoulder, and they're almost about to just take flight. And while in the other direction, you have Indra and his consort Shachi on Airavat. And the way that these two panels kind of merge into each other, and it almost feels that they're going to collide. So Hoysala temples are therefore known for this wealth of images and dense ornamentation, which has been unsurpassed in other temple traditions which were contemporary to them. The preoccupation with carved detail reflects the consummate skills of local artisans, as well as the possibilities of the chloritic, the soapstone medium itself, to achieve great precision. Figures of divinities, consorts, celestials, and humans are overwhelmed with encrusted costumes, jewels, and hairstyles. The weapons, emblems, and other attributes that they hold are equally similarly embellished. The high point possibly of the Belur temples are these madanikas, these fashionable naturalistic male and female figures with sensitive facial expressions, fully rounded bodies, animated hand gestures, and gracefully or dynamically disposed limbs. Among the greatest masterpieces of Hoysala art are these madanikas, brackets angling outwards from the top of columns in temple porches and mandap interiors, fashioned in almost 3 dimensions as maidens posed beneath trees and foliage. At Belur, where the greatest number of such brackets are found, maidens appear as dancers playing musical instruments, huntresses bearing bows and arrows, or simply as young women admiring themselves in a mirror. And here again, you can see the evolution of style. We do see these kind of brackets which begin to have figural sculptures on them, right from the Badami Chalukyas to the Kakatiyas. But as you can see, the material was different. While the Chalukyas were using sandstone, in Badami, the Palampet Kakatiyas were using granite, which is a much harder material. But what the Hoysalas were able to, the level of ornamentation and detail that the Hoysalas were able to take these bracket figures into using soapstone was absolutely something else. Ornamented pediments over the doors and lintels also show deities set in copious foliation issuing from open-mouthed makaras with strolling tails at either side. Garuda as an auspicious figure and Narasimha savagely killing Hiranyakashipu above Garuda for tormenting Pralyad are motifs which find repetition across different doorways and lintels. The stone screen panels that you see in the mandapas of these temples also are broken into different registers which show different narratives and stories. Here, the bottom register shows Bali making his gift to Vaman. In the middle register, you have Vaman now transformed into Trivikram and paces out the earth. To the right, Garuda drags away Bali's evil minister. The top register has Vishnu and Lakshmi flanked by Hanuman and Garuda. These are other panels and which have different themes and motifs. At Belur, you can see a comprehensive range of Vishnu avatars. And like I said, in Belur, they're more static. They're standing. They're not as animated. And Narasimha and Varaha seem to be the favorites of this vocabulary. When we come to Halebidu, we see these formal postures, but they're in much more, there's a lot more emotion and expression. So you see here Shiva appearing in this very violent mood, triumphantly dancing in the skin of the elephant demon. But you also see Krishna holding up Govardhan in a very, very artistic, detailed way. And the mountain is then sheltering rows of of herds. One of the most celebrated compositions is that of this Ravan with multiple heads shaking Kailas, as well as this Mohini, which is a prominent frame of looped garlands on a column. So, of course, we can go into, and which is what I showed earlier as the number of scholarly books which have been written, which focus primarily on the iconographic and the sculptural exuberance of these temples. And there's a lot of material where one can go into a lot of depth, both in the narratives and the stories that they tell, as well as the physicality of the form itself. But one that I'm going to conclude with, which I found extremely playful as well as interesting, is this memorial pillar, which also holds an inscription just in the complex of the Hoysaleshwar, which is almost this sort of a stop motion in today's what we would understand as different frames of a stop motion animation sculpted onto the stone pillar. It is an inscription on a cubical base, which relates the tragic story of Kuvara Lakshman, a bodyguard of Ballal II, who killed himself after his royal master died. And you have many such figures of Kuvara Lakshman, the first one showing that the dagger is at his throat, and then you kind of turn around and the last one shows that he is beheaded. So it's also this very interesting way in which what the text of an inscription is saying is also sort of visually represented in these imaginative ways. And therefore, just to conclude, when we look at these three temples today in the context of this Hoysala legacy that we have inherited, it is really a living archive of what of the creative genius that was represented by the rulers and the artisans of the time. But it also joins other globally recognized monuments such as the Angkor Wat and other monuments of Cambodia in really putting these temples up there on a global pedestal and platform as being equal in their intention and what they achieved now to wider global audiences as well. And I hope that this will lead to a greater and wider appreciation, not only of these monuments at the local, regional, and national level, but now also bring a great international spotlight, which will help to sort of sensitively, but also in the correct way, ensure the conservation not only of these three specific monuments, but of the wider body of the entire oeuvre of Hoysala temples, which remains in the region today. So I will conclude with that slide. Thank you so much.